I don't even know why you're
You knew
here
about this
tonight.
the whole time, didn't you?
Ethan's voice
How
cut
could you
through the
lie to
room
the
like
family?
glass shattering. Every head turned toward
You
me.
knew exactly what you
My
were
own
doing,
son
didn't you?
stood across the dining table.
Don't sit there pretending you didn't
His
know the
jaw tight.
consequences.
His eyes filled with something colder than anger.
After everything, she has nothing
You were
to
never
say.
there, Mom.
Look at her,
Not
pretending she's the
once.
victim.
Every time I needed you were gone. A quiet murmur spread through the family. I felt their judgment before anyone even spoke. I could have told the truth. I could have ended it all right there. But instead, I just sat there holding my breath because the truth would destroy everything he thought he knew. And maybe it would finally show him why I had to disappear. If this story makes you feel something, please take a moment to like the video. And if you've ever misunderstood someone you love, I'd really like to hear your story. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the truth takes time to reveal itself. I didn't respond to Ethan that night, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. And none of them would sound like love to a son who had spent his entire life believing I had abandoned him. The truth doesn't always feel like truth when it finally comes out. Sometimes it feels like betrayal all over again. So I stayed quiet. But that silence, it carried me back to the beginning, back to Seattle, back to the small 2-story house with the chipped white fence and the creaky front door that Ethan used to slam whenever he was upset. He was 8 the first time he asked me a question I couldn't answer. "Mom, why do you leave at night?" I remember freezing in the kitchen, my hand still gripping the edge of the sink. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, like it was counting down the seconds I had left before I had to lie. "I have work," I told him softly. "You always have work," he said, his voice trembling, not angry yet just hurt. "But you don't tell me where." I turned to him, forcing a smile that didn't belong on my face. "It's just complicated, sweetheart." That word complicated became the shield I hid behind. Complicated when I left. Complicated when I came back at dawn. Complicated when I missed his school plays. Complicated when I forgot his birthday one year because I was sitting in a car across the street from a man I never wanted my son to meet. Ethan stopped asking questions after a while. Children do that when they realize answers won't come. They build their own. And the story he built about me was that I didn't care. I remember one night more clearly than the rest. It was raining hard. The kind of rain that makes everything look blurry, like the world is trying to hide itself. Ethan stood at the doorway, clutching his old blue blanket, the one he refused to throw away even when it started falling apart. "You're leaving again?" he asked. I nodded, already reaching for my coat. "Can you stay tonight?" he whispered. That whisper nearly broke me. I almost said yes. I almost dropped everything and stayed right there with him, wrapped him in my arms, told him that nothing else mattered more than him. But I couldn't, because everything else was about him. "I'll be back before you wake up," I promised. He didn't argue. He just stepped aside and let me pass. That was the moment something changed between us. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Like a door closing in a house you thought was still open. After that, Ethan stopped waiting up for me, stopped asking where I was going, stopped leaving the hallway light on. And I told myself that was better, that it meant he was getting used to it, that he was strong. But deep down, I knew the truth. He wasn't getting used to it. He was learning how to live without me. The calls started not long after, always at odd hours, always from numbers I didn't recognize. I would step outside to answer them, lowering my voice, glancing back at the house to make sure Ethan couldn't hear. "Yes," I would say, "I understand." "No, he doesn't know anything," That last sentence, I repeated it so many times, it lost meaning. No, he doesn't know anything. No, he doesn't know anything. No, he doesn't know anything. But every time I said it, I felt like I was losing a piece of him. Or maybe a piece of myself. There were days I didn't come home at all. Days that stretched into nights and nights into mornings, where I would sit in my car a few blocks away, watching the house waiting for the right moment to return. I'd see him through the window sometimes, doing homework at the kitchen table, eating cereal alone, falling asleep on the couch with the TV still on. And I would sit there, just watching, a stranger outside her own life. Once I saw him trip on the front steps. He scraped his knee and looked around instinctively like he expected someone to come running. Like he expected me. But I wasn't there. Not in the way he needed. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my hands went numb. Every instinct in me screamed to run to him, to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay. But instead, I stayed in the car. Because stepping out in that moment would have undone everything I had been trying to protect. That's the part no one understands about sacrifice. It doesn't feel noble. It feels like failure. Like watching your child hurt and choosing not to stop it, because stopping it would make something worse happen later. Ethan never knew how close I was. How many nights I sat outside that house. How many times I turned the car around just to make sure he was safe. How many decisions I made that broke me just so nothing would break him. But from his side of the story, I was just gone. And the more I disappeared, the more space grew between us. Space filled with questions, then assumptions, then anger. By the time he was 12, he had stopped calling me Mom. And the more I disappeared, the more space grew between us. Space filled with questions, then assumptions, then anger. By the time he was 12, he had stopped calling me Mom when he was upset. He started calling me Melissa. The first time he did it, I felt something inside me crack. "Melissa, you forgot to sign my permission slip," he said flatly. Not even looking at me. Not even waiting for a response. Just stating a fact like I was a stranger who had failed to do her job. I signed the paper, hand shaking, and I wanted to say something, anything. But what could I say? That I had been up all night tracking a man who shouldn't have existed in our lives anymore. That every absence had a reason, that every lie had a purpose. No. I said nothing. Because silence was the only way to keep him safe. And that silence, it cost me my son. The first time I realized who Daniel Brooks really was, I wished I had never met him. When I married him, he wasn't the man people would later describe in hushed voices. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who made you feel safe just by standing next to you. That illusion didn't break all at once. It cracked. Slowly, quietly, dangerously. At first, it was small things, late-night phone calls he would take outside, business trips that never quite lined up with the stories he told, a tension in his shoulders whenever someone knocked unexpectedly on the door. I told myself it was stress. I told myself every marriage had secrets. But then one night changed everything. Ethan was asleep upstairs. He had just turned 7. I remember because he had spent the entire day showing me his new drawing stick figures of us holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "Don't leave tonight," he had said. I kissed his forehead. "I won't." For once I meant it. But around midnight, I woke up to voices downstairs. Low, sharp, wrong. I stepped out of the bedroom, careful not to make a sound, and moved toward the staircase. The house was dark except for a thin line of light coming from the living room. That's when I heard Daniel. "You don't get to change your mind now." His voice was different, cold, flat. The kind of voice that doesn't ask, it decides. I moved closer, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear it. And then I saw him. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room facing another man I had never seen before. The stranger looked nervous, no terrified. His hands were shaking. "I told you I'd get you the money," the man stammered. "You told me a lot of things," Daniel replied. And then Daniel reached into his jacket. I froze. Time slowed in a way I had never experienced before. He pulled out a gun, not something you see in movies and dismiss as fiction. A real one. Heavy. Final. My breath caught in my throat. My first instinct was to scream, but something deeper, something primal forced me to stay silent. Primal forced me to stay silent because Ethan was upstairs. Because if I made a sound, everything could change in a second. "I don't like being lied to," Daniel said calmly. The man to a step back. "Please, I have a family." Ethan was upstairs. Because if I made a sound, everything could change in a second. "I don't like being lied to," Daniel said calmly. The man took a step back. "Please, I have a family." "So do I," Daniel interrupted. For a moment, I hoped that he would lower the gun, that this was just intimidation, that this wasn't real. But then, Daniel stepped closer, and the look on his face, it wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It was control. Complete and absolute. That's when I understood something that terrified me more than the weapon in his hand. This wasn't the first time. I don't remember how long I stood there. Seconds. Minutes. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I saw enough. Enough to know that the man I had married was not someone my son could ever be safe around. Eventually, the stranger left. I don't know how. I don't know what was said after that. I just remember retreating quietly back into the hallway, my legs barely holding me up. I closed Ethan's bedroom door and leaned against it, my body shaking. Inside, he slept peacefully, unaware, safe for now. I slid down to the floor, covering my mouth to keep from making a sound, because if I cried, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop. The next morning, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee, read the newspaper, kissed me on the cheek like he always did. "Everything okay?" he asked casually. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had stood in our living room holding a gun the night before, and I realized something horrifying. He was good at this. Good at pretending. Good at hiding. Good at making people believe whatever version of him he wanted them to see. "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Everything's fine," because in that moment I understood something else too. If I confronted him, if I accused him, if I made even the smallest mistake, I wouldn't just be putting myself in danger. I'd be putting Ethan there too. And that was a risk I could never take. So I started watching, listening, paying attention to every detail I had ignored before. The names he mentioned, the places he went, the tension that filled the room whenever certain phone calls came in. I became someone else in my own home. Careful, quiet, observant, and the more I learned, the worse it got. Daniel wasn't just involved in something illegal. He was connected to people who didn't forgive mistakes. People who didn't disappear just because you asked them to. People who would use anything and anyone to get what they wanted, including a child. That realization hit me one afternoon when I found something I was never supposed to see. Daniel had left his laptop open. That alone was unusual. He was always careful, always controlled. But that day, he slipped. I shouldn't have looked, but I did, and what I found made my blood run cold. Files, photos, names, transactions that didn't make sense, and buried among them, a picture of Ethan. Not a family photo, not something innocent. It was taken from a distance, like someone had been watching him, studying him, tracking him. I felt the world tilt beneath me, because in that moment, everything became clear. Ethan wasn't just Daniel's son. He was leverage, a piece on a board I didn't even understand. And if something went wrong, if Daniel lost control, if someone wanted to hurt him, they wouldn't come after me. They would come after Ethan. I shut the laptop with trembling hands, my heart racing. That was the moment I made my decision. Not later, not after thinking it through. Right then. I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't risk my son growing up in a house where danger lived behind polite smiles and quiet threats. But leaving wasn't simple, because Daniel Brooks was not the kind of man you just walk away from. And I knew the moment I tried, he would notice. And when he noticed, everything would change. So I did the only thing I could. I started planning, carefully, silently, knowing that every step I took had to protect the one person who believed I didn't care at all. My son, Ethan. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. After that night, after the gun, after the photo of Ethan on Daniel's laptop, I stopped being a wife. I became a strategist. Every word I spoke, every move I made, it all had to be calculated. Because I wasn't just planning to leave. I was planning to disappear without letting Daniel realize what I was doing until it was too late. And that was the hardest part. Not the fear, not the danger, but pretending that everything was still normal. I still cooked dinner, still asked Ethan about school, still sat across from Daniel at the table nodding as he talked about his business. And every time he smiled at me, I wondered how many people had seen that same smile before everything went wrong. The first step was gathering proof. Not for myself, I already knew the truth, but for protection. Because if I was going to take Ethan away from a man like Daniel Brooks, I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence. So I waited. I watched. And I collected receipts, phone numbers, dates, names, anything that might matter later. I started keeping a small notebook hidden behind the loose panel in the back of my closet. Every night after Ethan went to sleep and Daniel locked himself in his office, I would write down everything I had noticed. At first, my hands shook, but over time I got better, colder, more precise. That scared me in a different way, because the more careful I became, the less I recognized myself. The second step was reaching out for help, and that nearly got me caught. I couldn't go to the police directly, not without risking Daniel finding out. If he had connections, if anyone tipped him off, I wouldn't get a second chance. So I chose someone else, a lawyer, someone discreet, someone who knew how to move quietly. I drove 2 hours out of Seattle to a small office in Portland under the name M. Turner. The man I met there, his name was Andrew Collins, listened without interrupting. That alone made me trust him. Most people would have doubted me. Most people would have asked questions in the wrong way. But Andrew, he understood the situation almost immediately. "You're not just trying to leave your husband," he said carefully. "You're trying to protect your son from something much bigger." I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. But his next words chilled me. "If what you're saying is true," he continued, "then you have to be very careful. Men like Daniel, they don't let go easily, and they don't forgive betrayal. I'm not worried about myself, I said quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. You should be, he replied. But I wasn't. Not really. Because by then I had already made peace with what I might lose. The real question was how to protect Ethan. Andrew explained my options. Most of them weren't options at all. If I filed for divorce openly, Daniel would fight. If I tried to take Ethan and run, Daniel would track us. If I confronted him, things could turn violent. Every path led to risk. Until Andrew mentioned something I hadn't considered. There is one way, he said slowly. But it's not easy. I leaned forward. Tell me. It would require cooperation with federal authorities, he said. If Daniel is involved in the kind of activities you're describing, they may already be watching him. You could provide information in exchange for protection. Protection for Ethan. Yes. And me. He hesitated. Not in the way you're hoping. That hesitation told me everything. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Andrew said carefully, that if you become part of an investigation, you may have to step away from your current life completely. New identity, no direct contact, especially if Daniel remains active. My heart dropped. No contact with my son. He didn't answer right away, and that silence was louder than anything he could have said. That's not an option, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Because every other option was worse. The meeting lasted hours. By the time I left that office, the sun was already setting, and I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to accept what I had just agreed to. Because I had agreed. I didn't sign anything that day. But I made the decision. I would cooperate. I would give them everything I knew about Daniel Brooks. And in return, they would make sure Ethan was never used against him, never targeted, never even noticed. But the cost was something no mother should ever have to consider. I had to become absent, not temporarily, not occasionally, completely. I drove home that night with a calm I didn't recognize, because once a decision like that is made, there's no room left for hesitation, only action. The next few weeks blurred together. Meetings in secret locations, conversations in hushed tones, men and women who never gave me their full names but knew everything about Daniel already. I wasn't starting an investigation. I was stepping into one that had been unfolding long before I realized it, and that terrified me, because it meant Daniel was already deeper into something than I had imagined. Are you sure about this? One of the agents asked me during our final meeting. I thought of Ethan, of his small hand holding mine, of the way he used to look at me before everything changed. Yes, I said. They slid a document across the table. An agreement, not just legal, but final. Once I signed it, there would be no turning back, no explaining things later, no fixing the damage in the moment, only the hope that one day the truth would be enough. My hand hovered over the pen. For a second, just 1 second, I hesitated, because I knew exactly what I was giving up. His birthdays, his milestones, his childhood, his trust, his love, all of it, gone. Not because I didn't want it, but because keeping it would put him in danger. I closed my eyes, and I saw him again, standing in the doorway. Can you stay tonight? The memory hit me like a knife, and I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't just leaving him. I was choosing to let him believe I didn't love him so he could live. That was the truth. Ugly, unfair, necessary. I picked up the pen, and I signed Melissa Turner, the name he would grow up resenting, the name that would become a ghost in his life. And the moment the ink touched the paper, I felt something inside me break in a way that could never be repaired. Because from that point on, I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was his protection, from a distance, in silence, and at a cost he would never understand. Until now. Disappearing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. First, you stop saying certain things. Then, you stop asking certain questions. And eventually, you stop existing in the way people remember you. The day I left Ethan wasn't dramatic. There were no alarms, no shouting, no sudden chaos. Just a quiet morning that looked like every other morning before it. I made him breakfast. Pancakes, his favorite. He sat at the kitchen table, still half asleep, his hair messy, his eyes barely open. "Why are you being nice today?" he mumbled. I smiled, even though my chest felt like it was collapsing. "I'm always nice," I said softly. He shook his head. "Not like this." That broke me more than anything else. Because even at 8 years old, he already knew something was different. I sat across from him, watching him eat, memorizing every small detail. The way he held his fork, the way he squinted when the light hit his eyes, the way he hummed under his breath without realizing it. I didn't know when I would see him again, or if I ever would. "Are you going somewhere today?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged. "You look like it. Children see things adults try to hide." That was something I had learned too late. I reached across the table and brushed his hair back gently. "I'll be around," I said. It wasn't a lie, just not the truth he needed. Daniel left for work not long after. He kissed me goodbye like he always did. "Don't forget dinner tonight," he said. "I won't," I replied. And for the first time, I knew that promise didn't matter. Because by the time dinner came, I wouldn't be there. The agents had given me instructions. Precise, strict, no hesitation. At exactly 10:15 a.m., a black SUV would be parked 2 blocks away. I was to leave the house alone. No bags, no signs, no goodbye, especially no goodbye. That was the hardest rule. I spent the next few hours pretending everything was normal. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, answered a few emails, all while watching the clock. Every second felt heavier than the last. At 9:50, Ethan came downstairs again. "I forgot my math book," he said, grabbing his backpack. "You'll need it," I replied. He hesitated. Then he looked at me in a way he hadn't in a long time, carefully, like he was trying to figure something out. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question hit me like a wave. I wanted to tell him everything, right then, right there, to drop the act, to hold him and say, "I'm doing this for you. Every second of this is for you." But I couldn't. Because if he knew, if he showed even the smallest sign, Daniel would notice, and everything would fall apart. "I'm okay," I said. He nodded slowly. Then he turned and walked out the door. And just like that, my last chance was gone. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the empty doorway, listening to the silence he left behind. At 10:10, I grabbed my coat. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought I would be shaking, crying, breaking down. But I wasn't, because something inside me had already shut down. Maybe that's what survival feels like. Or maybe it's just what loss looks like before it fully hits. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. Not once, because if I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep walking. The SUV was exactly where they said it would be, the engine running, the windows tinted. I approached slowly, my heart pounding louder with each step. The back door opened before I even reached it. "Melissa Turner," a voice asked. "Yes, get in." No hesitation, no second thoughts. I climbed inside, and the door shut behind me with a finality that echoed through my entire body. We drove in silence for a while. I didn't ask questions. They didn't offer answers. Eventually, one of the agents handed me a folder. Inside was my new life, a new name, a new address, a new identity. Everything I had been, I didn't ask questions. They didn't offer answers. Eventually, one of the agents handed me a folder. Inside was my new life, a new name, a new address, a new identity. Everything I had been reduced to paper. "You understand the rules?" he asked. I nodded. "No contact," I said quietly. "No contact," he confirmed. "And him?" I asked, even though I already knew. "He'll be monitored," the agent said. "Discreetly. He won't know." I closed my eyes. That was the only comfort I had left. That he would be safe, even if he never knew why. We arrived at a small apartment in Denver. Temporary, they said. Nothing about my life felt permanent anymore. "This is where you'll stay for now," the agent explained. "For how long until it's over? And when is that?" He didn't answer, because there was no clear ending, just time. Uncertain, unforgiving, unending. That first night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window staring out at a city that didn't know me, didn't care about me, didn't even realize I existed. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, my son was probably sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. Or maybe not waiting anymore. Maybe he had already stopped. Maybe he had already started building the version of me that would live in his memory. The one who left. The one who didn't come back. The one who didn't love him enough to stay. That thought hurt more than anything else, because the truth was the exact opposite. I had loved him too much to stay. Too much to risk it. Too much to let him become a target in a world he didn't even know existed. So I sat there alone in a room that didn't feel like mine, and I whispered something I knew he would never hear. "I'm still here, Ethan. Just not where you can see me." And from that moment on, that became my life. Watching from the shadows, protecting from a distance, loving in silence, while he grew up believing I was gone. Time doesn't slow down when you leave your child. It speeds up, and somehow it still feels like you're frozen in place. The first report I received about Ethan came 3 days after I arrived in Denver. It was delivered in a plain envelope. No return address, no markings, just my new name typed neatly across the front. Inside, there were only a few pages. Short, clinical, cold. Subject, Ethan Turner, age 8. I stared at that line for a long time. Subject, not my son, not Ethan, just subject. That's how they saw him, a person to monitor, a variable to protect, a piece in a situation that had nothing to do with him, and yet everything to do with him at the same time. I forced myself to read. Day 1. Subject returned home from school at 3:42 p.m. No unusual activity observed. Day 2. Subject exhibited signs of distress. Refused dinner. No direct cause identified. My chest tightened. Refused dinner? That wasn't no direct cause. That was me. Day 3. Subject asked repeatedly about mother's whereabouts. Guardian Daniel Brooks responded minimally. I put the paper down. I couldn't breathe. This was the part they didn't prepare you for. They told me I wouldn't be able to see him. Didn't tell me I'd have to read about him like a stranger reading a case file. Didn't tell me I'd have to learn about his pain in bullet points. I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to hold everything in. Because if I let it out, if I let myself feel everything at once, I wouldn't be able to function. And I needed to function, because I wasn't done protecting him. Not even close. The reports kept coming. Daily at first, then weekly. Each one another piece of a life I was no longer part of. I learned when he stopped asking about me. It was in week 3. Subject no longer inquires about maternal absence. That sentence. It should have felt like relief, but it didn't. It felt like loss. Because that meant he had stopped expecting me to come back, stopped believing I would, stopped needing me. And that was the price I had agreed to. Months passed, then a year. Ethan grew older, stronger, more independent. At least that's what the report said. But between the lines, I saw something else. Anger, confusion, a quiet kind of hurt that didn't disappear. It just buried itself deeper. And then came the first incident. I remember the report clearly. Subject nearly involved in vehicular accident at intersection of Pine and 4th. Intervention occurred. Subject unharmed. My hands went cold. I read it again and again. Nearly involved. Intervention occurred. That wasn't luck. That was them. Or, more specifically, that was me. Because every intervention had to be authorized, approved, executed. And I was the one who said yes. Later that day, one of the agents, Richard Hayes, came to see me. He had been assigned as my primary contact. Calm, measured, the kind of man who never raised his voice. Your son is safe, he said. How close was it? I asked. Closer than we would have liked. What happened? Driver ran a red light. One of our people redirected him just in time. I nodded slowly, trying to process, trying to stay steady, but inside, everything was shaking. I want more coverage, I said. Richard frowned slightly. He already has significant protection. I don't care, I replied. Double it. That increases visibility. I don't care. He studied me for a moment. You're asking for more risk, he said. If Daniel becomes aware. He won't. I cut in. Not if we're careful. Richard didn't respond immediately, but eventually he nodded. All right. That was the moment I crossed another line, from passive observer to active protector, from watching to controlling. And once I started, I couldn't stop. Every close call became personal. Every small detail mattered. At 14, Ethan got into a fight at school. The report said it was minor, but I read between the lines. He wasn't just angry. He was carrying something that had been building for years. Do we intervene? Richard asked. I hesitated. This wasn't physical danger. This was something else, something I couldn't fix from a distance. No, I said finally. Let it happen. That decision stayed with me longer than any other. Because protecting him didn't mean shielding him from everything. It meant knowing when to step in and when to let him grow, even if that growth hurt. At 16, another incident, subject followed by unknown individuals for approximately 2 blocks. Intervention executed. Subjects dispersed. This time, I didn't wait. Who were they? I demanded. We're still investigating, Richard said. Were they connected to Daniel? Possibly. Possibly. That word wasn't good enough. Then we assume they are, I said. Increase surveillance immediately. It's already in motion. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm down, trying to remind myself that I had chosen this, that this was the only way. But every time something like this happened, I questioned it. Every single time. Because I wasn't there. I couldn't see his face, couldn't hear his voice, couldn't tell him it would be okay. All I could do was make decisions from a distance and hope they were enough. Years passed like that. Close calls, near misses, invisible interventions. Ethan never knew. He just lived his life, unaware of how many times it had almost gone wrong, unaware of how many times someone stepped in, at exactly the right moment, unaware that the person making those calls was the same one he believed had abandoned him. By the time he turned 18, he had survived more than he would ever realize, and I had watched every second of it, from the shadows, from reports, from fragments of a life I wasn't allowed to touch. And sometimes, late at night, I would sit by the window again, holding one of those reports in my hands, reading the same lines over and over, looking for something more, something human, something that reminded me he was still my son, not just a subject, not just a file, but Ethan, the boy who once stood in the doorway and asked me to stay. And every time I remembered that, I would whisper the same thing into the silence. I didn't leave you. I stayed in the only way I could. Even if he never believed it. Even if he never understood. I knew the truth. And that truth was the only thing holding me together. Hatred doesn't appear overnight. It grows, quietly, patiently, like something planted deep inside, fed by silence, watered by unanswered questions. And I watched that happen to my son, one report at a time. By the time Ethan was in his 20s, the tone of the reports had changed. They were no longer about a confused child. They were about a man who had decided what kind of person his mother was. Subject displays consistent avoidance when maternal topic is raised. Subject refers to Melissa Turner by first name only. Subject expresses resentment during conversation with peers. That last one stayed with me. I asked Richard about it. What exactly does that mean? I said, holding the report tighter than I realized. It means he talks about you, Richard replied carefully. How? He hesitated, and I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. He believes you chose to leave, he said, that you had other priorities. I let out a slow breath. That I didn't care. Richard didn't respond, because he didn't need to. That silence again. Always the silence. It said everything. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Of course he does, I whispered. How could he believe anything else? From his perspective, I had disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye, no return. Just absence, and absence is the easiest thing to turn into blame. The hardest part wasn't that he hated me. It was that his reasons made sense. That was the cruelest twist of all, because if I had been in his position, I would have hated me too. There were moments when I almost broke. Moments when I wanted to send a letter. Just one. Something simple. I'm alive. Because if I had been in his position, I would have hated me too. There were moments when I almost broke. Moments when I wanted to send a letter. Just one. Something simple. I'm alive. I love you. I never left you. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the rules. No contact. Not because they wanted to punish me, but because any contact, even the smallest, could expose everything. And if Daniel was still watching, if he was still waiting for a mistake, that letter could become a target. And Ethan could become leverage again. So I stayed silent, even when it felt like that silence was destroying everything that mattered. Was destroying everything that mattered. One night, Richard came by unannounced. That alone told me something was wrong. "What is it?" I asked immediately. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "There's been a development," he said. My stomach dropped. Ethan. One night, Richard came by unannounced. That alone told me something was wrong. "What is it?" I asked immediately. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "There's been a development," he said. My stomach dropped. "Ethan." "He's okay," Richard reassured me quickly. "But he's started asking questions." "What kind of questions about you?" I felt my chest tighten. "That's not new." "No," Richard said, "but this time it's different." I stared at him, waiting. "He's been looking into your past," he continued, digging deeper than before. My heart started pounding. How deep? "He's been trying to track your movements, where you went, who you spoke to, why you left." I shook my head slowly. "That's not good." "No," Richard agreed. "It's not, because the closer Ethan got to the truth, the closer he got to Daniel. And that was a line we could never let him cross." "What do we do?" I asked. "We monitor," Richard said. "We intervene if necessary, because the closer Ethan got to the truth, the closer he got to Daniel. And that was a line we could never let him cross." "What do we do?" I asked. "We monitor," Richard said. "We intervene if necessary. Intervene." That word again. But this time, it wasn't about physical danger. It was about something more complicated, something harder to control. The truth. Weeks passed. Ethan kept digging. I could see it in the reports. Subject contacted former acquaintances of Melissa Turner. Subject visited previous residents. Subject requested records related to family history. Each line brought him closer, and every step forward felt like a step towards something I couldn't protect him from. Because this wasn't something I could block with surveillance or redirect with intervention. This was personal. This was emotional. This was the kind of danger that didn't come from the outside. It came from within. One night, I sat in my apartment staring at a photo I had kept hidden for years. The only one I allowed myself. Ethan at 5 years old, smiling, holding my hand, looking at me like I was his entire world. I traced the edge of the photo with my finger, trying to remember what it felt like to be that person, to be the center of his life. Not the mystery, not the absence, not the reason behind his anger. Just his mom. "I'm losing him," I whispered. Richard, who had been standing near the door, didn't respond immediately. "You already did," he said quietly. The words hit harder than I expected, because they were true. I had lost him the moment I walked out that door. Everything after that was just distance, growing wider, colder, harder to bridge. "But he's getting close," I said. "If he finds out everything on his own, he won't," Richard interrupted. "How can you be sure? Because we won't let him." I looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means," Richard said carefully, "that if he gets too close, we redirect him." Redirect. We give him another path, another explanation. I felt something inside me tighten. "You mean we lie?" Richard didn't flinch. "We protect." I stood up, shaking my head. "No, Melissa? No, I repeated. I've already taken everything from him. His mother, his trust, his childhood. I'm not taking the truth too. This isn't about truth, Richard said firmly. It's about safety. It's always about safety. I shot back. But what happens when he finds out we've been controlling everything? Watching him. Deciding what he gets to know? Richard didn't answer. Because there was no good answer. That was the problem. Every choice we made protected him in one way and hurt him in another. And there was no version of this where he didn't get hurt. I turned back to the photo, staring at that little boy who still believed I would always be there. I can't lie to him anymore, I said softly. You're not lying, Richard replied. You're staying silent. That's the same thing. No, he said. It's survival. I closed my eyes because I didn't know which one was worse anymore. The silence or the truth. And somewhere out there, my son was searching for answers, not knowing that every answer he found had already been shaped by the very person he was trying to understand. Me. The night everything finally came back to the surface felt almost unreal. After years of watching from a distance, years of silence, years of knowing things I could never say, I was suddenly standing in the same room as my son again. And he hated me. That part was real. The gathering was supposed to be simple. A small family dinner in Los Angeles, Daniel's side of the family. A few relatives, a few familiar faces I hadn't seen in over a decade. I wasn't even supposed to be there, not officially, but things had changed recently. Daniel's activity had slowed. The investigation had reached a point where my presence, carefully controlled, carefully timed, wouldn't immediately trigger suspicion. Or at least, that's what they told me. Richard had been the one to suggest it. You may have a window, he said, a chance to re-enter his life indirectly. Indirectly. Even now, there were rules. Always rules. Do not explain anything, he warned. Do not engage emotionally. Observe. That's all. Observe. After everything. That was all I was allowed to do. But I agreed. Because even a glimpse, even a moment in the same room, was more than I had allowed myself to hope for. When I walked into that house, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might collapse. Everything looked the same. The layout, the furniture, even the smell. Time had moved on, but somehow this place hadn't. And then I saw him. Ethan. Standing near the dining table, taller, stronger, older, but still, unmistakably, my son. For a second, I forgot everything. The rules, the danger, the years. All I saw was him, and every instinct in me screamed to run to him, to hold him, to say his name. But I didn't, because I couldn't. So I stood there, frozen, watching like I had done for years. Only now I wasn't behind glass. I wasn't reading reports. I was there, and he was right in front of me. He noticed me almost immediately. His expression changed the moment our eyes met. Confusion first, then recognition, and then something much sharper. You came, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The room quieted instantly. Every conversation stopped. Every movement slowed. All attention shifted to us. I swallowed hard. Yes, I said softly. It was the first word I had spoken to him in years, and it felt fragile, like it could break under the weight of everything unsaid. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course you did," he said. "Now." The tension in the room thickened. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Someone else tried to pretend nothing was happening. But everyone was listening. Everyone was watching. Ethan, one of his relatives, started, "Maybe this isn't—" No, he cut them off. "It's exactly the place." He stepped closer. Not aggressive, not threatening, but determined. "You don't get to just show up like nothing happened." He said, his eyes locked on mine. I didn't respond, because anything I said would be wrong. Too little, too late, too empty. "You know what's funny?" he continued. I used to imagine this moment. My chest tightened. I used to think maybe you'd come back with some big explanation. Some reason that would make everything make sense. His voice wavered for just a second, but then it hardened again. "But you didn't," he said. "You just left." The words landed exactly where he meant them to. And I felt every single one. I waited. He added quietly. That was the part that broke me. Because I knew. I had seen it in the reports, felt it in every line. But hearing him say it out loud, in front of everyone, it was different. "I waited for years," he continued. "And then, one day, I stopped. Silence. Heavy. Unforgiving. And now you're here," he said, shaking his head. "Like none of that matters." I wanted to tell him. God, I wanted to tell him everything. That I had never stopped watching, never stopped caring, never stopped being his mother. But the truth? The truth wasn't something I could just say. Not like this. Not here. Not with Daniel's shadow still hanging over everything. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed quiet, and that was the worst thing I could have done. Because to him, my silence meant guilt. It meant I had nothing to say, nothing to defend, nothing to explain. "You see," he said, turning slightly to the room. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." He looked back at me. "You were never there," he said, each word sharper than the last. "Not when I needed you, not when things got hard, not once." The room felt smaller, tighter, like there wasn't enough air. And still I said nothing. Because I couldn't. Because the truth was too dangerous, and my silence was safer. Even if it destroyed what little we had left. "You know what I learned," Ethan said, his voice steady now. "I learned not to expect anything from you." I closed my eyes for a brief second, because that was exactly what I had been afraid of. That way, he continued, "You can't disappoint me anymore." There it was, the final wall, built brick by brick over years of absence and silence. And I had built it myself, piece by piece, without ever meaning to, without ever wanting to. But intention doesn't change the outcome. Not when you're not there. Not when all someone sees is that you left. The room stayed quiet. No one knew what to say. No one knew how to fix it. Because this wasn't something that could be fixed with words. Not anymore. I opened my eyes again and looked at him. Really looked at him. Not through reports, not through memories, but right there, in that moment, my son, standing in front of me, hurting, angry, lost, and believing I had chosen all of it. "I'm sorry," I said finally. The words felt small, insufficient, but they were all I could give him. For now, for this moment, for this version of the truth. He stared at me for the long time, like he was trying to decide if those words meant anything at all. And then he shook his head. No, he said quietly. You don't get to do that. And just like that, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Because everything he believed, everything he thought he knew, was about to be challenged. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just change how he saw me. It would change everything. The moment everything started to shift didn't come from me. It came from someone Ethan had never met, and someone I had been hoping would never have to step into his life like this. The silence after Ethan's words hung in the air, like something fragile, ready to shatter. No one moved. No one spoke. And for a second, I thought that would be it. That this would end the way it had begun. With him walking away, and me standing there, with nothing left to say. But then the front door opened. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. Every head turned, and a man stepped inside, older, composed, unfamiliar to most of the people in that room. But not to me, Richard Hayes. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly why he was there. Ethan Turner, he said calmly. Ethan frowned slightly, caught off guard. Yeah, he replied cautiously. Who are you? Richard stopped a few feet away. My name is Richard Hayes, he said. I think it's time you heard something important. The room shifted. Confusion, suspicion, curiosity. Ethan crossed his arms. This isn't really a good time, he said. I understand, Richard replied. But this isn't something that can wait. I felt my heart start to race. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. Richard had promised. But then I realized something. This wasn't about plans anymore. This was about timing. And maybe this was the only moment we were going to get. Ethan glanced at me, then back at Richard. What does this have to do with her? He asked. Everything Richard said. That word landed heavily. Ethan's expression hardened. I don't need anyone explaining her to me, he said. I already know who she is. Richard didn't react, didn't argue, didn't push. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Thick, worn, heavy with something more than just paper. Do you? Richard asked quietly. That question changed something. Not completely, not instantly, but enough. Enough to make Ethan hesitate. Look, Ethan said, shaking his head slightly, if this is some kind of excuse. It's not, Richard interrupted. His voice remained calm, measured, but there was something else there too. Certainty. You've spent years believing a version of the truth, he continued. What I'm offering you is the rest of it. The room was completely silent now. No whispers, no movement, just tension, waiting to break. Ethan looked at the folder, then at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not trust, not yet, but something else. Doubt. What is that? He asked. Proof, Richard said simply. Ethan let out a short breath. You're serious? Yes. And you expect me to just believe whatever's in there? No, Richard replied. I expect you to question it. That answer caught Ethan off guard, because it wasn't defensive, it wasn't persuasive. It was, and you expect me to just believe whatever's in there? No, Richard replied. I expect you to question it. That answer caught Ethan off guard, because it wasn't defensive, It wasn't persuasive. It was honest. Slowly, reluctantly, Ethan stepped forward. Richard handed him the folder. And for a moment, everything stood still. Because that folder contained years of silence, years of decisions, years of things I had never been able to say. Ethan opened it. The first few pages were simple. Dates, locations, reports. He flipped through them quickly at first, almost dismissively, like he expected to find nothing, like he was ready to prove that this was all meaningless. But then, he slowed down. His brow furrowed. His posture shifted. "What is this?" he asked. "Keep reading," Richard said. Ethan did. Page after page, line after line, and I watched his expression change. Confusion, then focus, then something deeper, something heavier. "These are reports," he said slowly. "Yes." "On who?" Richard didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because Ethan already knew. He flipped to another page, then another. His breathing changed, subtle at first, then more noticeable. "These dates," he muttered. "These places." He looked up suddenly. "They match things that happened to me." No one spoke. No one interrupted, because this was the moment. The moment everything started to connect. "What kind of things?" someone in the room asked quietly. Ethan didn't look at them. His eyes stayed locked on the pages. "An accident," he said. "When I was 15. He turned another page. "Someone pulled me out of the street." "What kind of things?" someone in the room asked quietly. Ethan didn't look at them. His eyes stayed locked on the pages. "An accident," he said. "When I was 15. He turned another page. "Someone pulled me out of the street right before a car hit me." Another page. "Then there was this time I thought someone was following me." His voice slowed, became uncertain, but they disappeared. He flipped again. "And this doesn't make sense?" Richard stepped forward slightly. "Read the annotations," he said. Ethan scanned the page more carefully this time. His lips parted slightly. "Intervention executed," he read aloud. His voice dropped. "Authorized by." He stopped. His eyes moved across the page again, slower, like he was trying to make sure he wasn't seeing things, and then he said it, softly, almost like he didn't want it to be real. "Melissa Turner." The room shifted again, this time with shock. Ethan looked up at me, for the first time since I had walked into that house. There was no anger in his eyes, only confusion. "What is this?" he asked. And this time, it wasn't an accusation, it was a question. A real one, the kind he had stopped asking years ago. My chest tightened, because this was the moment I had imagined, the moment I had feared, the moment I had waited for, and I still couldn't answer him. Not fully, not safely. But now, he was starting to see, starting to question, starting to realize that the story he had built about me might not be the whole truth. Richard stepped in again. "She didn't leave you unprotected," he said. "She did the opposite." Ethan's gaze snapped back to him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Richard continued, "that everything you thought was random wasn't." Ethan shook his head slightly. No, that's not possible." "It is," Richard said. Ethan looked back at the folder, then at me, then back again, and I saw it. The crack. Small, fragile, but real. The first break in the wall he had built around me. And I knew this was just the beginning. Because once doubt enters, it doesn't leave quietly. It grows, it spreads, it demands answers. And soon, He would want all of them. The room didn't breathe. Not after Ethan said my name like that. Not after he saw it written in black and white attached to moments he had always believed were coincidence. Now nothing felt accidental anymore. "What is this?" he asked again, his voice quieter this time. But it wasn't anger anymore. It was something heavier, something closer to fear. Richard didn't rush. "This," he said, gesturing to the folder, "is a record of interventions that kept you safe over the years." Ethan shook his head slowly. No, that doesn't make sense." He flipped back through the pages faster now, almost desperate. "Why would she?" He stopped himself. "Why would I what? Protect him, be there, care?" The question hung unfinished, because the answer didn't match the version of me he had carried for so long. "These dates," Ethan muttered. This was when I was in high school." He pointed to a page. There was a car that almost hit me. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room like he needed someone to confirm it. I remember that one of his cousins said quietly, "You said some guy just grabbed you out of nowhere." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I never saw his face." He looked back at the page. "Intervention executed by field operative." His voice trailed off. "And authorized by," he whispered. His eyes flicked up to me again, and this time there was something else in them. Uncertainty. Richard stepped in again. "You weren't imagining those moments," he said. "They weren't luck." Ethan let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "So what you're saying my entire life has been what?" "Watched, yes." The word landed hard. "By who?" Ethan demanded. Richard didn't hesitate. "By a team assigned to monitor threats connected to your father." That changed everything. The room shifted again, not just tension this time, shock, confusion. Daniel's name hadn't been spoken out loud yet, but now it was there, in the open. "My father," Ethan said slowly. His voice felt distant, like he was trying to process too many things at once. "What does he have to do with this?" Richard glanced at me for a brief second, a silent check, a question without words. I didn't respond. I couldn't, but I didn't stop him either. Because at this point, the truth was already unfolding, and there was no stopping it. "Your father," Richard said carefully, "was involved in activities that created risk." Ethan frowned. What kind of activities? Richard paused. Not because he didn't know, but because once he said it, there would be no going back. "Criminal operations," he said. The word echoed in the room. Criminal. Ethan's expression hardened again, but differently this time. Not defensive, not angry, just unsettled. "That's not possible," he said. "He runs a business." "Yes," Richard replied. "He does." The emphasis wasn't lost on anyone. "And you're saying she knew about this?" Ethan asked, his voice tightening. "Yes. And instead of telling me she just left?" That was the question. The one that had defined everything. The one that had built years of anger. And now it was finally being asked in the right context. Richard didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. "She made a decision," he said slowly. Ethan scoffed. "A decision to disappear. A decision to protect you." The room went still again. Ethan stared at him, then at me, then back again. "That's not protection," he said. "That's abandonment." The word hit harder this time, because now it wasn't just an accusation. It was a challenge, a demand for something that made sense. Something that explained how those two things could exist at the same time. And for a moment, no one spoke, because this was the line. The one place where truth and pain collided, and neither one could exist without the other. Richard stepped closer, his voice quieter now, more direct. If she had stayed, he said, you would have been exposed. Ethan frowned. To what? To your father's world. Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're exaggerating. No, Richard said. I'm not. Ethan shook his head. Then I'm not. Ethan shook his head. Then explain it, he demanded. Explain how leaving your kid alone is protecting them. Richard didn't look away, because staying would have made you a target. That landed hard. Ethan blinked. Just once, but it was enough. A target, explain it, he demanded. Explain how leaving your kid alone is protecting them. Richard didn't look away, because staying would have made you a target. That landed hard. Ethan blinked. Just once, but it was enough. A target, he repeated. Yes. For who? For anyone who wanted leverage over your father. The room seemed to shrink, as if the walls themselves were closing in on the truth. Ethan looked back down at the folder. His hands weren't steady anymore. He turned another page, then another. Each one, another page, then another. Each one, another piece of something he hadn't even known existed. These reports, he said slowly, they go back years. Yes, you're telling me this has been happening my whole life, another piece of something he hadn't even known existed. These reports, he said slowly, they go back years. Yes, you're telling me this has been happening my whole life, yes, and He stopped again, struggling, trying to find the right word. She was behind it. Richard nodded once. Yes, Ethan's eyes lifted slowly, back to me, and this time, there was no anger, no certainty, just confusion, deep, unsettling, real. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. The question was soft, but it hit harder than anything he had said before. Because now, he wanted an answer, a real one, not an accusation, not a rejection, a question. The kind he used to ask when he was a child, the kind I had never been able to answer. And even now, standing right in front of him, I still couldn't give him everything. But I could give him something. I wasn't allowed to, I said quietly. My voice felt fragile, like it might break under the weight of everything I had kept inside for years. Ethan stared at me. Not allowed, he repeated. I nodded. It wasn't safe, I said. For who, he asked. For you. Silence again. But this time, it was different, because something had shifted. Not completely, not enough, but enough. Enough for him to hesitate, enough for him to question, enough for him to realize that maybe, just maybe, he didn't know the whole story after all. The word criminal didn't just hang in the air. It changed the entire room. You could feel it, people shifting uncomfortably, eyes darting, whispers starting and stopping before they could fully form. Because Daniel Brooks wasn't just a name anymore. He was a question, and questions demand answers. Ethan stood there still holding the folder, but now it looked heavier in his hands. Not physically, emotionally. Say it clearly, he said, his voice tight. W had exactly, are you saying about him? Ethan stood there still holding the folder, but now it looked heavier in his hands. Not physically, emotionally. Say it clearly, he said, his voice tight. What exactly are you saying about him? Richard didn't hesitate this time, because once the door was open, there was no point pretending otherwise. "Your father was involved in organized financial crime," he said. "Money laundering, coercion, and connections to violent individuals." The words were precise, controlled, but they hit like a shockwave. "That's a lie." Someone from Daniel's side of the family snapped immediately. Ethan didn't look at them. His eyes stayed locked on Richard. "You have proof?" he asked. Richard nodded. "Yes." "Then why isn't he in prison?" "Because investigations like this take time," Richard replied. "And because people like your father are careful." Ethan's jaw tightened. Careful. That word again. The same word I had used in my own mind years ago. Careful, controlled, dangerous. "You're saying she knew all of this?" Ethan asked, his voice lowering. "Yes." "And instead of telling me..." He stopped. Because now he already knew the rest. "She left," he finished. The silence that followed wasn't just tension anymore. It was understanding beginning to form. Slowly. Painfully. "Why not take me with you?" Ethan asked suddenly. The question hit harder than anything else, because that was the one I had asked myself 1,000 times, the one that never had a simple answer. Richard glanced at me again, but this time I spoke before he could. "Because I couldn't," I said. My voice was steady, but it took everything I had to keep it that way. Ethan turned to me fully, his eyes searching mine. For what reason, he asked. I took a breath, trying to choose words that were honest but still safe. "Because if I had taken you, I said you would have become the reason they found me." His brow furrowed. The people connected to your father." The room went still again, because now it wasn't just about Daniel. It was about something bigger, something darker. "You think they would have come after me?" Ethan asked. "I know they would have," I said, not guessing, not assuming, knowing. Because I had seen the evidence, seen the photos, seen the files, seen the way his name appeared in places it never should have. Ethan looked back at the folder, then flipped to another section. "What about this?" he said, pointing. "It says surveillance maintained due to ongoing risk." Richard stepped closer. "Your father wasn't just being investigated," he explained. "He was being watched by people outside the law as well." Ethan's expression shifted again. "Meaning?" "Meaning." Richard said if something went wrong, if he lost control, if someone wanted leverage, Ethan's voice dropped. "They'd use me." "Yes." The word didn't echo. It sank. Deep, heavy, permanent. And for the first time since this began, Ethan didn't argue, didn't push back, didn't reject what he was hearing, because something inside him recognized it. Not logically, not completely, but instinctively. Then why didn't he ever? Ethan started but didn't finish. "Because he didn't need to," Richard said. "As long as things were stable, you weren't a target. But if anything changed, he didn't finish either. He didn't have to." Ethan understood. We all did. I watched him process it, piece by piece. The anger, the confusion, the resistance, all of it shifting into something else, something harder to hold on to. Because now the story he had believed didn't fit anymore. And when a story breaks like that, it doesn't disappear. It collapses. "What about you?" Ethan asked, suddenly looking at me again. "What about me?" I replied softly. Where were you? He said. All those years. If you were protecting me, where were you? That question. That was the one that mattered, because it wasn't about accusations anymore. It was about understanding. I was close, I said. He frowned. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now. That was the one that mattered, because it wasn't about accusations anymore. It was about understanding. I was close, I said. He frowned. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now. Right now, he repeated. You mean there's more? Yes. The word felt heavy, because there was more, so much more. Things I still couldn't say. Things that involved people, systems, agreements that were still active, still dangerous. And that was the part he didn't understand yet. That's not fair, he said. His voice wasn't angry anymore, just tired. You don't get to come back after all this time and still keep secrets. I swallowed hard. Because he was right. From his perspective, I was still doing the same thing. Withholding, hiding, not trusting him with the truth. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said quietly. But you are, he replied. The words weren't sharp. They weren't meant to cut. They were just honest. And that made them worse. I know, I said. And for the first time, I didn't try to defend it. Because some damage doesn't have a defense, only a reason. And sometimes, the reason isn't enough. Ethan looked down again, at the folder, at the years he had never known, at the moments that suddenly meant something different. And I saw it, the shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something else. Understanding beginning to take shape, slow, uncertain, fragile. And I knew this was the turning point, because once the truth starts to surface, it doesn't stop. And what came next would change everything he thought he knew, not just about me, but about his father, about his past, about his life. And there was no going back, not for him, not for me, not for any of us. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from people not speaking. It comes from people realizing something they can't unlearn. That was the silence filling the room now. Ethan stood still, the folder still open in his hands, but he wasn't reading anymore. He was thinking. And I could see it happening. The way his eyes moved, the way his jaw tightened, then loosened. The way his breathing shifted like he was trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. His version of the past, the one where everything made sense, the one where I had simply left. Okay, he said finally. The word was quiet, measured, dangerous in its own way. Then explain this to me. He flipped to the back of the folder. There were documents there I had never intended him to see. Not like this, not yet. Letters, dozens of them, folded, dated, unsent. What are these? He asked. My chest tightened instantly. I knew exactly what he was holding. The one thing I had kept for myself. The only way I had allowed myself to still be his mother. I wrote those, I said. Ethan looked at me, his expression unreadable. But you never sent them, he said. No. Why? I swallowed. Because that answer was going to hurt. Because I wasn't allowed to contact you, I said. He shook his head immediately. That doesn't make sense. You're telling me you were watching me, protecting me, making decisions about my life, but you couldn't send a letter that's exactly what I'm telling you. He stared at me, searching, looking for a crack, a lie, something he could hold on to instead of what I was saying. But there wasn't one, only truth. And it wasn't the kind he wanted. He opened one of the letters. His hands were slower now, more careful. Like he understood that whatever was inside was going to matter. Dear Ethan, he read softly, the sound of his own name in my words. After all these years, it felt like something breaking open inside me. I saw you today. He stopped. His eyes flicked up to me, then back down. I saw you today walking out of school, laughing with your friends. His voice faltered slightly. You looked happy. He swallowed, then kept reading. I wanted to run to you. I wanted to call your name. I wanted to tell you I'm still here. The room felt smaller, tighter, like every word was taking up space. But I couldn't. Ethan's voice dropped even lower. Because if I did, it would put you in danger. He stopped reading. His fingers tightened around the paper. You were there? He asked. His voice wasn't accusatory. It was shaken. Yes, I said. How many times? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was too much. A lot, I said finally. He let out a breath that sounded almost like disbelief. You're telling me all those years you were just watching, yes? And I never saw you? No. His head shook slightly, like he was trying to physically reject the idea. This doesn't make sense, he said. This isn't normal. No, I said quietly. It's not. He looked down at the letter again, then flipped to another. Dear Ethan, this doesn't make sense, he said. This isn't normal. No, I said quietly. It's not. He looked down at the letter again, then flipped to another. Dear Ethan, you almost got hurt today. His voice tightened, but you didn't, and I thank God for that. Another page. I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. Another. You don't need me the way you used to, and that hurts more than I expected. He stopped again. This time, longer. Because something in those words hit deeper. Something he recognized. Something he had felt, even without knowing where it came from. Why keep these? He asked. Because it was the only way I could talk to you, I said. Talk to me, he repeated. You weren't talking to me. You were writing things I'd never see. I needed to say them anyway. He looked at me again, and this time there was something new in his expression. Not anger, not confusion, something closer to grief. For who, he asked? For me or for you? The question cut deeper than anything else he had said. Both I answered honestly, because that was the truth. Those letters, they weren't just for him. They were for me too. A way taught for him. They were for me too. A way to hold on to something I had already lost. A way to stay connected even when I wasn't allowed to be. Ethan closed the letter slowly, then looked at the rest of them. How many are there? He asked. I don't know, I said. I stopped counting. He nodded faintly, then picked up another one. But this time, he didn't read it out loud. He read it silently. And I watched his face. Every small shift, every flicker of emotion, every moment where something changed. Because this was the part no report could capture, no document could explain. This was the truth in its rawest form. Not facts, not evidence, but feeling. And that's what broke people. Not what happened, but how it felt. After a while, he lowered the letter. And when he looked at me again, something had changed. Not completely, not enough, but enough. You were really there, he said. Not a question, a realization. Yes, and you never came to me. No, even when you saw me struggling. I hesitated, because that part was harder. Yes, I said. His jaw tightened again, but it wasn't the same anger as before. It was something more complicated, more conflicted. Why, he asked again. And this time, it wasn't about logic. It was about pain. Because if I stepped in, I said softly, everything I had done to protect you would have been undone. He stared at me, trying to understand something that didn't feel right. Something that didn't fit into the way he had always seen the world. You chose this, he said. Yes. You chose to let me think you didn't care. I didn't look away. Yes. He let out a slow breath, and for a moment, no one moved, because this was the truth. Not clean, not easy, not comforting, but real. And now, he had it, even if he didn't know what to do with it yet. There's a moment when everything you believed about your life starts to fall apart, where your mind doesn't break all at once. It fractures, piece by piece, and I could see that happening inside Ethan, right in front of me. He wasn't reading anymore. He wasn't arguing anymore. He wasn't even asking questions the same way. He was remembering. And that was the most dangerous part, because memories don't stay the same once the truth changes. They shift. They rearrange. They reveal things that were always there but never understood. I remember that night Ethan said suddenly. His voice was distant, like he wasn't speaking to me anymore, like he was speaking to himself. There was this guy outside the school parking lot. He frowned. He kept watching me. Someone in the room shifted uncomfortable. I thought I was just being paranoid, he continued. I even told my friend about it. He laughed it off. His grip tightened around the folder. But then the guy disappeared. He looked up. At Richard. At me. At the time, I thought it was nothing. Richard didn't interrupt. Didn't confirm. Just let him continue. Then there was that accident, Ethan said, shaking his head slightly. The car that ran the light. His eyes narrowed. I never saw the driver again. The police report said it was inconclusive. He flipped back through the pages. Faster now. Connecting through the pages. Faster now. Connecting things. Linking moments. This one, he said, pointing. This was when I got jumped in high school. A murmur spread through the room. You told everyone it was just some random fight things. Linking moments. This one, he said, pointing. This was when I got jumped in high school. A murmur spread through the room. You told everyone it was just some random fight, someone said quietly. Ethan nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He looked back at the report. Intervention prevented escalation. His voice dropped. There were 2 guys, they just showed up out of nowhere. His breathing became uneven. They pulled those guys off me before it got worse. He looked up again. This time directly at me. You knew about that. There were 2 guys, they just showed up out of nowhere. His breathing became uneven. They pulled those guys off me before it got worse. He looked up again. This time directly at me. You knew about that, he said, not asking, stating. Yes. His jaw tightened. But you didn't come to me? No, not even after that. No. The word hurt both of us. I could see it, feel it, but it was still the truth. And he needed the truth now, even if it didn't comfort him. Why, he asked again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was something deeper, something more personal. Why would you watch all of that happen and not come to me? I took a slow breath. Because this was the part no one prepares you for. Explaining a choice that makes no sense unless you've lived it. Because coming to you would have exposed you, I said softly. He shook his head immediately. That doesn't make sense. It does, I insisted gently. You just don't have all of it yet. Then give it to me, he said. The words came out sharper than he intended, desperate, frustrated, real. I can't give you everything, I said. Why not? Because some of it still isn't safe. His expression hardened again. So, we're back to secrets. No, I said quietly. We're at the truth, just not all of it at once. He let out a breath. Frustration, pain, exhaustion, all mixed together. I don't even know what to believe anymore, he admitted. That was the moment, the real turning point. Not when he saw the evidence, not when Richard spoke, but now. When he said that. Because doubt had replaced certainty. And once certainty is gone, everything becomes possible. I do, I said. He looked at me, not trusting, not rejecting, just looking. You were never alone, I said. The words felt small compared to everything else, but they mattered, because they were true. His eyes flickered slightly, like he didn't want to accept that, but couldn't ignore it either. Doesn't feel like that, he said quietly. I know. You weren't there, he added. I was, I said, not like a mother should be. That hit, because he was right. I wasn't there the way he needed, the way he deserved, the way I wanted to be. No, I admitted, I wasn't. Silence again, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was heavy, processing, understanding, grieving, because that's what this was. Grief. For the years we lost. For the moments we never had. For the version of our relationship that never got to exist. Ethan looked back down at the letters, then picked one up again. You wrote about my graduation, he said. Yes. You were there. I nodded. In the back. His throat tightened slightly. You saw me walk across that stage? Yes. And you didn't... He stopped, didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. You didn't come to me. You didn't hug me. You didn't say you were proud. I wanted to, I said. But you didn't. No. His hand dropped slightly, still holding the letter, still holding the proof, still holding everything that didn't make sense. I spent years thinking you didn't care, he said. His voice was quieter now, less sharp, more vulnerable. I know. And now you're telling me you cared too much. Yes. He let out a small, broken laugh. That doesn't even sound real. It didn't feel real either, I said softly. That made him pause, because that was something he could understand, even if he didn't fully accept it yet. Then what am I supposed to do with this? He asked. He gestured to the folder, to the letters, to everything. I didn't have a perfect answer. There wasn't one. You don't have to do anything with it right now, I said. You just have to see it. He looked at me, long, carefully, like he was trying to decide something, not about the past, but about the present, about what came next. And I knew this was the moment everything balanced on. Not the truth itself, but what he chose to do with it. Because understanding doesn't automatically lead to forgiveness. Sometimes it just leads to more pain. But sometimes it opens the door. Just a little. And I could see it. That door. Not wide open. Not welcoming. But not closed anymore either. And after all these years, that was more than I had allowed myself to hope for. The room slowly emptied. Not all at once. People didn't rush out or make a scene. They just drifted away. One by one. Quietly. Like they understood this wasn't something they were meant to witness anymore. And for the first time that night, it was just the two of us. Ethan and me. No voices, no interruptions, no one else to absorb the tension. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that forces you to face what's left. He stood near the window staring out into the dark. I stayed where I was. Neither of us moved closer. Not yet. Because Dophus moved closer. Not yet. Because distance had been our language for too long. I don't know how to talk to you, he said finally. His voice was low, honest. I know, I replied. He let out a breath. Everything I thought about you, it was simple. Distance had been our language for too long. I don't know how to talk to you, he said finally. His voice was low. Honest. I know, I replied. He let out a breath. Everything I thought about you, it was simple. He turned slightly, but not fully. You left. You didn't come back. That was it. I nodded. I made it simple for you. He gave a small, almost bitter smile. Yeah, you did. Silence again, but softer now. Less sharp. I built my whole life around that, he continued, around not needing you. The words hurt, but they weren't meant to. They were just truth. I know. I told myself I was better off, he said. Stronger. I didn't interrupt, because he needed to say this, not for me, for himself. But now he hesitated. His shoulders tightened slightly. Now I don't know what to think. That was the moment, the real one. Not anger, not confrontation, but confusion. And confusion is where change begins. You don't have to decide anything right now, I said gently. He turned to face me fully this time, and for the first time, there was no wall in his eyes, just conflict. You keep saying that, he said, but I've already spent years not knowing. I don't want to stay there. I took a small step forward. Careful. Measured. I'm not asking you to stay there, I said. I'm asking you to take your time getting out of it. He studied me, like he was trying to figure out if that was another excuse, another delay, another form of distance. I don't trust you, he said. The words were blunt, direct, but not cruel, and that mattered. I know, I said. I want to, he added quickly. I just figure out if that was another excuse, another delay, another form of distance. I don't trust you, he said. The words were blunt, direct, but not cruel, and that mattered. I know, I said. I want to, he added quickly. I just don't know how. That hurt more than anything else, because it wasn't rejection. It was effort, struggle, something trying to move forward but not knowing how. That's okay, I said softly. It doesn't feel okay. It won't. I admitted. He shook his head slightly. You missed everything he said. My childhood, my graduation, everything that mattered. I didn't miss it, I said. He frowned. That's not what the letters say. I was there, I repeated, not in the way that matters. He wasn't wrong. That was the hardest part. You're right, I said, quietly. He blinked, caught off guard. I should have been there differently, I continued. I should have been able to stand next to you. To hold had been able to stand next to you. To hold why you. To tell you I was proud. My voice softened, but I wasn't allowed to. He looked away again. Everything comes back to that. He said, what you weren't allowed to do. Yes. Oh, you. To tell you I was proud. My voice softened, but I wasn't allowed to. He looked away again. Everything comes back to that. He said, what you weren't allowed to do. Yes. And you just accepted it. I paused, because that wasn't entirely true. No, I said slowly. I chose it. That made him turn back sharply. You chose to leave me. I chose to protect you, I said. That's not the same thing. It was for me. He stared at me, trying to understand something that still didn't feel right. You could have taken the risk, he said. You could have told me, trusted me. You were a child, I replied. So you shouldn't have had to carry that. His jaw tightened again. I carried worse, he said. That hit, because I knew exactly what he meant. Loneliness, abandonment, questions with no answers. Yes, he had carried worse. But that didn't mean he should have. I know, I said softly. And I'm sorry for that. He looked at me again, long, carefully. And then he asked the question I had been waiting for. Not fearing, not avoiding, waiting. If you could go back, he said, his voice quieter now, would you do it the same way? The room felt still again, because that question was everything. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I needed him to understand the weight of it. If I had done it differently, I said slowly, you might not be standing here right now. His breath caught slightly. I don't know if that's true. I do. Silence. Heavy. Real. And if the choice is between you hating me, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper, or you not being safe. I met his eyes. I would choose this again. The words landed, not softly, not gently, but honestly. And honesty isn't always comforting. Sometimes it just is. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, taking it in, processing, feeling. And I could see it, the shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something deeper. Respect. Understanding. Something beginning to form where anger used to be. You really believe that he said finally, yes, you still do. Yes. He nodded slowly, not agreeing, not fully accepting, but acknowledging. And that was enough for now. Because this wasn't about fixing everything in one moment. It was about starting something new. Even if it was fragile, even if it was uncertain, even if it took time. And for the first time in years, we weren't standing on opposite sides of a wall anymore. We were just standing, facing each other, trying to figure out what came next, together. Healing doesn't arrive like a sudden moment. It doesn't walk into the room and fix everything that's broken. It starts quietly, almost unnoticeably, and that's how it began for us. Ethan didn't come closer right away. He didn't reach for me, didn't suddenly call me Mom. It starts quietly, almost unnoticeably, and that's how it began for us. Ethan didn't come closer right away. He didn't reach for me, didn't suddenly call me Mom again, but he didn't walk away either. And after everything we had been through, that mattered. We stayed there for a while, standing in the same room, no longer separated by years of silence, but not yet connected by anything stronger either. Just present, together. What happens now? He asked eventually. The question wasn't heavy like the others. It wasn't filled with anger or confusion. It was simple, forward-looking, and that alone felt like progress. I took a breath. Carefully. Now we take it one step at a time, I said. He nodded slightly. Does that mean you're staying? He asked. That question, it carried something fragile inside it. Hope. Small, careful, but real. Yes, I said. For good, yes. There was a pause, a long one, because permanence was something I had never been able to give him before. And now I was offering it, even if it felt unfamiliar, even if it felt uncertain. Daniel, he asked. I knew this part was coming. The situation with your father is being handled, I said. He's no longer a threat to you. Ethan studied my face, looking for hesitation, doubt, anything that might suggest otherwise, but there was none. For the first time in years, that part was true. And you're sure, he asked? Yes. He nodded slowly, taking it in, accepting it at least enough for now. Then I guess he hesitated. I guess things can change. The words were simple, but they meant everything, because change was what we had both been afraid of. For different reasons, for different outcomes. But now, it was the only way forward. We moved to sit down. Not at the same table where everything had exploded earlier, but off to the side, somewhere quieter, somewhere new. And for the first time, we talked. Not about the past, not about Daniel, not about everything that had been lost, but about smaller things, safe things. He told me about his work, about the life he had built, about the people he trusted, the ones who had been there when I couldn't be. And I listened, really listened, not through reports, not through second-hand information, but directly, from him. And every word mattered, every detail, every pause, because this was what I had missed, and what I had fought to protect at the same time. You don't have to prove anything to me, he said at one point. The statement caught me off guard. I'm not trying to prove anything, I replied. You are, he said gently. But you don't have to. I looked at him, confused. Why not? He hesitated, then said something I never expected to hear. Because I can see it now. My chest tightened. See what? That you didn't leave because you didn't care. He paused. Even if I don't fully understand it yet, that was enough, more than enough, because understanding takes time, but seeing, that's where it starts. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, I said. I don't even know what that looks like yet, he admitted. That's okay. But, he added, and I held my breath without realizing it. I don't think I hate you anymore. The words landed softly, but they carried years inside them. Years of anger, pain, distance, and now they were beginning to loosen their hold. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak right away. Because if I did, I might lose control of everything I had been holding in. And this moment, it needed to stay steady, not overwhelmed, not broken, just real. We sat there for a while longer, talking, pausing, learning each other again, not as mother and son from the past, but as two people trying to build something new, something that had never existed before. And maybe that was the truth of it. We weren't going back. We couldn't. There was too much missing, too much changed. But we could move forward, carefully, slowly, honestly, and sometimes that's enough. When it was time to leave, he stood up first, then hesitated, like he wasn't sure what to do next. And I didn't push him, didn't step forward, didn't force anything, because this had to come from him, not me. He looked at me, really looked at me, and then he took a small step closer. Not enough to close the distance completely, but enough to show something had shifted. "I'll call you," he said. The words were simple, but they meant everything. "I'd like that," I replied. He nodded once, then turned and walked toward the door. But this time, it didn't feel like the end. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space, the kind you give someone when something new is growing. And as I stood there watching him leave, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel like I had lost him. For the first time in years, I felt something else. Hope. Quiet. Fragile, but real. Because he had seen the truth. Not all of it, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to start again. And sometimes, that's all you need. Sometimes the deepest love is the hardest to recognize. We often believe love must be visible spoken, shown present in every important moment. We expect it to look like comfort, like protection. We can feel like someone standing beside us when life gets difficult. But the truth is, love doesn't always appear in ways we understand. Sometimes it hides in silence. Sometimes it looks like distance. And sometimes it feels like abandonment, when in reality, it's the greatest sacrifice someone could make. Melissa's story reminds us that not all absence means neglect. Not all silence means indifference. There are people who carry burdens quietly, who make impossible choices behind the scenes, and who accept being misunderstood just to protect the ones they love. That kind of love is not loud. It doesn't ask for recognition, but it is powerful, and often it costs everything. Ethan's journey teaches us another truth: we don't always know the full story. We judge based on what we see, what we feel, what we experience. But there may be layers we've never been given the chance to understand. And sometimes the person we think hurt us the most was the one fighting the hardest for us. So before you close your heart to someone, before you decide, their actions define their love. Take a moment to ask yourself, what if there's more? What if the truth is simply hidden, waiting to be seen? If this story touched you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever misunderstood someone you loved? Or been misunderstood yourself? Share your story in the comments. Your voice might help someone else heal too. And if you believe in stories that reveal hidden truths and bring people closer together, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes the stories we need most are the ones that help us see love differently.